leave the door open or close the door? What do you normally do?
Yes, well, maybe we'll close it and then we'll start closing, we won't be able to, but let's do that, yeah. So I did post Mr. Kolakowski's book on Blackboard for those of you who didn't have a chance to go and look at it on reserve in the library, but now it's in the general, I'm happy to know that it'll be in the general circulation stacks.
Wow, that is indeed impressive.
So it's at Brooklyn College in the general circulation stacks, and I think it's really quite an honor and opportunity to have you here.
Right.
And I think, again, like whenever we've had a speaker, we always, after whatever type of discussion we have, we always get down to the point of wanting to know about careers and particular questions about careers. So this is an opportunity to really ask someone who's had a very interesting range of careers and
Yes.
really could share a lot with us. So I think that's going to be interesting. And maybe just to get started, I mean, you were telling me in the beginning, just in a few minutes we were together in the office, about working at Western Electric, which then became AT&T, and about a very bureaucratic kind of, we've read about bureaucracy and about that kind of environment and the authority structure and how that differs from a much more flexible and open type of structure that we find in different kinds of industries. Maybe you could tell us a little bit just about yourself, about your career, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about organizational culture, so it all ties in together.
Right. Yeah, well, just basically to tell you, to give you essentially the essentials of my resume, where I've been. Graduated Harvard College in 1980, where I studied economics. Graduated the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in '82, where I had an MBA in finance. And then the job market in 1982 was a very tough one. It was very similar to the job market today. In fact, many of my classmates at graduation time at Wharton in '82 did not have jobs, and I was very lucky. But the only two offers I got were from my previous two summer employers.
And that's what we're hearing from
And
students
that,
today.
and then that's what my colleagues at About.com, who deal with career planning, who deal with job search, who deal with internships, emphasize to me how important it is for summer jobs and internships to really get your foot in the door, because at least that way you make yourself known to these various employers. And the way I got those two summer jobs, one of them was between my senior year at Harvard and my first year at Wharton. And essentially a friend of my father's, who was an engineer at Western Electric now. Western Electric's probably a name you will not recognize unless you watch Turner Classic Movies and love the old black and white movies. You may see a little logo there, Western Electric Recording. Well, Western Electric was a company founded in the 19th century that for many years was the manufacturing arm of AT&T. Western Electric built essentially everything you needed to run the phone network, from cables and wires to switching equipment to the telephones that you actually had in your home. And people of your generation are probably not aware that prior to the mid-1980s, AT&T was essentially the telephone system in the United States. AT&T employed over 1 million people and controlled over 80% of the access lines to people's homes. And again, we're talking the era before there was any such thing as cell phones. So essentially, AT&T, through its various subsidiaries, was the telephone company. And the way I got into Western Electric is just what they call today networking, or back in my father's day would be called making contacts. My father had a friend who was an engineer at Western Electric in Newark, and this man was kind enough just to walk my resume around as a new college grad to try to get me a summer job there, and I wound up getting a summer job with a group in Newark, New Jersey at Western that did econometric modeling and forecasting. And the sort of modeling and forecasting they did was aimed at projecting what would be the growth in the telephone network, and hence what sort of production Western Electric should schedule in terms of how much cable wire, how much switching equipment, how much telephone handsets that they should be projecting to produce over the next X many years. So I was with that group for one summer, and then the summer between my 2 years as an MBA at Wharton, I responded to an ad that our career office at Wharton got for a company called American Cyanamid, yet another name which no longer exists, which was a major chemical company headquartered in northern New Jersey. And there was an opening with the corporate economists to do similar modeling and forecasting type work. So fast forward to when I'm graduating from Wharton in '82, the only two job offers I got were from those two groups. And there's a question of, well, which sounded more interesting? I went with the job at Western Electric because I saw opportunities at AT&T. AT&T had been sued by the U.S. Justice Department for antitrust violations for a number of years. And what AT&T decided to do to settle the suit was to enter into what was called a consent decree, in which AT&T would spin off all its local phone companies. So essentially today's Verizon is essentially an amalgamation of local phone companies that used to be owned by AT&T, just to give you an example. And so I thought, well, there's opportunity here, because AT&T was essentially going to spin off all its local phone companies and then just retain the Western Electric manufacturing operation and its long-distance telephone calling subsidiary, which was then called AT&T Long Lines. And the big thing that AT&T was expecting to do was to become a major player in computers, challenging IBM.
So you were there at a very interesting time.
Well, yeah, because that consent decree was announced while I was in my final year as an MBA at Wharton. And I said, you know, this sounds like there could be an opportunity, because the company's going to be turned upside down, and the econometric modeling and forecasting group, with which I had worked 2 summers prior, I contacted them, and they said that they would be very interested in bringing me back to be a key player in a project to model and forecast how these newly spun off phone companies would behave once they were no longer part of the AT&T family. Because that was a major concern for Western Electric. Because once the local phone companies, like what was then called New York Telephone and New Jersey Bell and Bell of Pennsylvania, became independent of AT&T, there was a great fear that they would turn to other suppliers of telephone equipment and therefore cause great damage to Western Electric sales. And so there was a high priority project to develop models to forecast what would happen in the post-divestiture environment. So I saw great opportunity there, and that's what led me into AT&T, and specifically in Western Electric. But and I don't know if I should now get into more specifics about the culture there before I move to the next step in my resume, or what do you think makes most sense?
Well, you know what I thought I would ask you, since you mentioned that you did have your degree in economics and you were doing modeling and forecasting, right. How prepared do you feel you were from the degree and the kind of training that you had at school, right. And how much did you have to learn? Because a lot of times students say that, well, yeah, I'm majoring in sociology and I want to go into human resources, and I feel like maybe I need to do a double major. Maybe you could talk a little bit about
this was the one example in my career where specific coursework I did really slotted me to a specific job. Because as an undergrad at Harvard, I'd taken several courses in statistics and econometric forecasting.
Right, so without that you would never have been, obviously.
Yeah, and that's what got me into that group to start with, when my father's friend, the engineer, was walking my resume around. That this was a group this is a very high-powered group. It was headed up by a PhD, and a lot of the staff, there are about maybe 20 people in this group, a lot of them had PhD. I think everyone had at least a master's degree in various quantitative disciplines, and several of them had PhDs. And there were also what I call sister departments, the one I was in, which similarly were headed up by people who had mathematics PhDs and were staffed with people with similar background. And so that's why the studies I had undertaken as an undergrad in statistics, in economics, and econometrics provided the fit that they were willing to take me on, because this was also something that this department, or Western Electric in general, typically didn't do. Take somebody on, as they used to call it, as a summer student, is what they used to call it, who was between undergraduate studies and graduate studies. They just never did that. It was just because my father's friend, the engineer, was very persuasive, and they saw my background, and when I got in there to talk to them, they thought I'd be a good fit, that they're willing to bring me on. But that's essentially what got the ball rolling. Since then, I hope we're not
No.
going too far afield here, as I've said to Professor Manlow and other people, since then, everything I've been involved in has been largely on what I call, what lots of people call on-the-job training, and really just
You mentioned that.
just basic skills. I can't emphasize this enough, that the skills that are really the most important to you in the end are become an excellent writer. You have to be able to put your thoughts on paper clearly and concisely. Take up public speaking if you can. It's probably the very best things I did in high school. One, I had the very best teacher of expository writing I think I would ever meet, Mr. Frank Walsh, longtime English teacher at Regis High School in Manhattan. I really learned how to write from Mr. Walsh. And then two, getting in the Hearn Speech and Debate Society at Regis, so I could get up in front of audiences and speak. And then the third thing is becoming numerate. Make algebra your second language. The fact that I knew algebra inside and out made everything so much easier. And so I constantly think in terms of models. And even in my years at Merrill Lynch, when we talk more about my career, the fact that I always thought in terms of rendering things into mathematical models, even though it wasn't as fancy as doing statistical sampling run, just being numerate to be able to put word problems and conceptual problems into mathematical form and then work for a solution is what was the underpinning of most of my Merrill Lynch career.
And what about a foundation in accounting? Did you have?
Accounting, in terms of what I did, was really not necessary at all. And this is something I mentioned to Professor Manlow, a student who happened to be in her office when I came by. The example I toss out of that, when I was at Merrill Lynch, we're fast forwarding some years from when I was at Western Electric and elsewhere in AT&T, possibly the very smartest person I ever worked on was this fellow by the name of Jeff Bennett at AT&T. And he rose to be chief financial officer of the retail brokerage half of Merrill Lynch, and a key advisor to the executive, Lonnie Steffens, who was the chief executive of that half of Merrill Lynch. Jeff Bennett only took one accounting course in his life, and that was a required course when he was at Harvard Business School. Jeff's background, Latin and Greek classics. He's now retired from Merrill Lynch and teaching Latin in a high school in New Jersey. However, he was the smartest financial person, chief financial officer
With such an unexpected.
ever known at Merrill. Well, but he's a man who is literate and numerate, and really his job did not require an accounting degree. His job and the way he focused it was more giving strategic advice to the executive in charge of that half of Merrill Lynch, rather because it really wasn't his responsibility to close the books. He had numerous CPAs on staff who would do that. He was a strategic thinker. Versus I contrast that with his successor, highly capable man who had an accounting degree and who had spent years at one of the major accounting firms, I forget which one. But for all the strengths Jeff's successor had in accounting, he lacked the strategic vision, and you can see that the chief executive of that half of Merrill Lynch found him a much less valuable business partner, because in terms of advising on strategic direction he wanted, he had a lot less to offer.
So would you maybe advise business students, those who have the time, that is double majoring or taking as many classes in areas outside of?
Yeah, to dip in, the problem is, as we discussed in your office, is I can't offer any magic formulas here. Because I think one of the great fallacies is, and I get this in terms of emails from readers of my About.com website. They say, well, if I get a degree in this major, what's the best major? If I major in this, or if I get this certification, will I get a career there? Not necessarily.
So many variables have to kind of combine.
So many variables. As we discussed in the office earlier, unfortunately we have a business culture today where good job openings are tight and companies are deluged with applications. So what they engage in is what I've seen called posting up pseudo requirements, saying, you have to have
Just to
You
get
have to have a
involved.
PhD, you have all these ridiculous requirements, but then when you actually get in there, you find out none of these credentials were actually needed, that any reasonably intelligent person who's adaptable
Right.
could have learned what to do on the job, but the company,
Just to be able
you
to sort
know,
it out,
it's,
makes it easier.
just hate to say, you know, human resources department that's either understaffed or lazy, or hiring managers that don't want to spend the time or are lazy, say, you know,
Right.
I just want to winnow through the pile. And guess what? Some of the people they may have kicked out who did not have all those credentials and sheepskins may actually have been superior candidates. And to get back to, you know, I hope you rein me in if I'm going around too much, but another thing we discussed in the office earlier, I offer this as an example. It's not a business example, but one of my nearest and dearest friends, going back to Regis High School, is one of the premier orthopedic surgeons in the New York area. When he was an undergrad at Yale, what do you think he majored in? Chemistry? Biology? No, English. English. He became expert, he was a particular lover of the novels of Hemingway. And he just took the bare minimum number of pre-med courses. But the fact that he's a literate person and he's interested in so many things. You know, I think I'm reasonably well read, but the stuff he comes up with when I talk to him, even a busy workday as a surgeon, where he's up well before dawn and home late in the evening, where he finds the time to read all this stuff, I don't know. The fact that he's a literate person and thinks in such a logical, organized fashion, whenever you talk about the most complicated topics in medicine, he gives it to you in plain English. It's not jargon. And what I find is oftentimes people who just speak to you in jargon, oftentimes I find that these are people who may not really grasp the subject as well as they would lead you to believe. That they just hang on to these buzzwords and just sort of parrot them.
I couldn't, I mean, I can't agree with you more. I read something somewhere that said, if you can't explain a concept simply to a 10-year-old,
Charger on me.
Okay, I'll get it.
then you don't understand completely.
Oh.
Because if you can't break it down.
This guy? Okay, no, you are absolutely right. That is an old
can't
reflection I heard when I was a kid, and you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
If you can't simplify the language to explain it to a child,
You really don't
you
know.
have not grasped
Or
the
you're
entire
hiding
picture.
behind,
You're hiding behind your
However,
words or vocabulary, whatever it is.
however, this gives me a chance, if you don't mind my digressing here.
No,
You know, we're talking about organizational behavior, corporate politics, and whatnot. I noticed one of the selections in the book.
Right.
I asked you to do. A very sharp fellow I worked for. In the book, I used the code name Zorro for him. This guy was the master corporate politician and whatnot. And then one day, very late in my tenure at AT&T, I moved from Western Electric to a different division of AT&T, and then I was and I'd already announced that I was leaving AT&T to go to Touche Ross, which is now part of Deloitte in their consulting business. So this fellow, who I call Zorro, just grabs me by the arm, turns to his secretary and says, "Helen, no calls, no calls." Barricades me in his office, gives me a marker, sits down and said, "Mark, tell me all you know about cost accounting, management accounting." I said, "Zorro, I only took a one-semester course of work." "Fine, that's all I need to know." So I filled up this whiteboard with all the buzzwords I learned in that one semester course in whatever you want to call it, management accounting, cost accounting, whatnot. I find out 2 days later he had just gotten the job as the chief financial officer of a AT&T joint venture with Telefonica in Spain to manufacture integrated circuits in Spain. And I turned to my colleagues and said, "Damn it. Zorro, clearly what he did was he went in there and he just, because he had a mind like a steel trap or stuff like that, he just probably let out a blue streak of all these buzzwords and said, wow, this guy really knows." Of course he knew beans. And it was just my 1 hour tutorial.
It's the same thing. I also read something in terms of I'm reading this book. I think this whole class should read this book. It's fabulous. It's called The 4-Hour Work Week. who was it by? Tim Ferriss, I believe?
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah,
Go.
and he discusses how to sort of, exactly what you're saying, to organize yourself in a way that you can do more in less time.
Right.
To automate more. But one thing he said in line of what you just said about being an expert, there's two ways you can go about being an expert. You can actually be an expert in this niche environment and know everything, make all the mistakes that needed in order to call yourself an expert, or to give the illusion to people that you are an expert.
Right.
Both are successful.
Right.
Both people are successful to everybody. So
Unless you're dealing with other experts.
yeah, unless you're dealing with, unless you're dealing with other experts, but you hit it right there.
Right.
You either use the buzzwords and you give the illusion that you're an expert.
Or this is another thing we talked about, and this is totally above board, but this only applies once you've reached a certain level in management. The very, very clever managers, like one of the very smart and great people I worked with at Merrill Lynch, Ed O'Connor. The idea is once you've reached a certain level in management, you put together a core group of people who you know really know their stuff and also are very adaptable. So that's the deal with O'Connor. You know, he was part of a team with this guy Jeff Bennett, I mentioned, the smart CFO at Merrill. O'Connor was hired into a job under Bennett to deal with transfer pricing and profitability analysis. O'Connor knew me from corporate job I had elsewhere in Merrill Lynch, and we used to interface regularly. He built this group. He knew I was the subject matter expert, yanks me in there. A couple of years down the line, O'Connor moves to a different position, being chief of staff to executive in charge of the new marketing area. One of the first things he does is he taps a lot of the people he had in his previous job who were really good to come with him and become subject matter experts under him. And then eventually, a couple of years later, he says, Mark, you know, here's a job. You've never been a controller or whatnot, but you can figure this out. You know, there's a group in trouble here. I know you can figure this out. And he drops me in this job, and I didn't know anything about being a controller or budgets or whatnot, but he arranged a package deal. He sent with me this young woman who is expert in doing budgeting type analysis and whatnot. So then that freed me up to be chief of staff to my new boss, as well as to do something entirely different. Even though I had the title of controller, I really spent 90% of my time on market research, even though I had a controller's title. But then to go on to serve O'Connor, then he leaves Merrill Lynch and goes to J.P. Morgan Chase. He brought this core group, about 6 people within the Chase, that had me in there as a consultant for a while. Then he moves on to UBS. We have the same group of 6 people there. Now he's at Morgan Stanley, same group. Well, again, you know, he found people he knows.
Right. And had you not
He knows, and this is entirely above board. Essentially a package deal. He gets hired into a job and he cranks the phone all these people. Hey, you want to come along with me? I could give you a bump in salary and this, that, and the other thing. And the company hiring him, well, sees results. So of course they're happy. He brings in the right people who can run rings around the current staff at the companies that he's joined. But that's an above board way of doing it. Once you reach a certain level of management, identify a key group of lieutenants who know their stuff, and that, you know, if you bring them along with you, they will get the job done, make you look good, and it's a win-win situation.
And that can be a core group of people you met during college. You know, you were in a club together, and you kind of go back to those people again and again. It can be people you've worked with in a particular.
Sure.
And that kind of points to what you were saying about the importance of networking.
Oh, yeah,
making those
definitely.
connections can lead to things that are totally
Right,
unexpected.
and of course with the O'Connor example, it's even beyond networking. It's you're actually comrades in arms, if you will, and somebody who's a manager on the move who knows what you can do for him or her, and then they want to bring you along, either along with them on internal moves or even external moves.
And also the importance of having a solid foundation, as you said, because you're bringing skills that can translate into another area.
Yeah, and this is what we're also getting into.
Yes.
Again, you know, we're sort of going around sort of circuitous path here, but the whole bit, like this example with Ed O'Connor moving around, is taking people who are highly adaptable, who would not necessarily be doing exactly the same thing in each new setting, but who he was confident would be able to adapt and figure out what needed to be done in the new environment, even in radically different jobs.
Now, just a few days ago, a student, not in this class, but in another class, who wants to be an investment banker, said to me in response to a criticism I made about something he wrote, and he said to me, well, I don't really need to be a great writer, I'm planning to be an investment banker. So I thought, I'm not gonna say anything, I'm gonna wait until you answer that question, because hopefully he'll be watching.
Wrong, you know,
What would you say? And
I'm an
he's-
investment banker, I get a letter of inquiry from somebody who can't express themselves, say, forget this, circular file, or an application, or a job application, or a resume that makes no sense, circular file, I've got 1,000 other candidates to look at. Or as an investment banker, you have to write memoranda, both internal and external to clients. You're gonna submit a report to a client that's gibberish, the client's gonna say,
There's no
what's this?
question.
I'm out of here.
Right, you need to be, and if you wanna be a police officer, you need to,
You have to be able to communicate with
writing,
people.
I don't know any
Communicating
position
writing
that doesn't require
good writing skills.
good writing skills.
And that's, toot my own horn, what I became known for at Merrill is that unfortunately in a lot of corporations, people tend to be overly verbose. Be the multi-page memo. And then this is, I'm sort of diverting here, but another funny thing O'Connor once said, these multi-page memos, you really wonder how many people actually read it. And the first department I was in within the product profitability group at Merrill, we had to produce a quarterly report that actually was largely numbers, a big thick book with all sorts of analysis and profitability numbers driven down to the level of Merrill Lynch's individual products. Like, what is the P&L for equities sold to retail customers, for our CMA account, for our retirement plan? There were maybe 80 different products, and there'd be a cover note attached to that in which, in verbal form, we described what were the highlights here. And one thing that always used to annoy O'Connor is, and this is the other end, because this was, I think, was a very well crafted memo when we had it down to just 2 pages. That some people would be too lazy to read the stupid thing, and so they'd be calling us on the phone and waste all sorts of time. O'Connor was a nervy enough guy. Once in the middle of this, he just inserted in the very middle of this memo said, if you actually read this, call me and I'll give you $1. and he only got one guy, an ex-West Pointer, actually read this and said, okay, Ed, give me my $1. But this way you smoked out a lot of people who are too lazy to read it. But I may be digressing there. But in terms of, being able to write clearly memoranda, that's why I bucked the tide, because a lot of people thought within Merrill that long memo showed, you already put effort in here. And I know I worked for one manager a long time at Merrill. This guy used to agonize over the most insignificant memo for days, if not weeks. And there'd be constant revisions and stuff that could be said in one sentence. It would become essentially the telephone book. This guy drove us nuts. And that's why I went the other way. And my typical memo had only like half the page, but people actually remembered them. They actually remember what I said because it was terse, it was concise, it was to the point. It was not one of these things where I had to embed in there, did you actually read this? Call me and I'll give you $1.
How about any questions? We've talked about a couple of things so far. I mean, about a particular field or anything that you'd like to ask that comes up so far.
Yes.
I like to ask this question to everybody that I find successful. In your job searching, in your career paths, did you ever come across were you ever afraid? Did you ever have fear to apply to a specific position, whether you thought you had the skills or you didn't? What was your attitude?
No, never fear. Because my father, he'd be a wonderful guy if we could just package him. One of the things he always taught me at a young age, the way he would say is very gruff, is saying, all I can say is no. Open your mouth, ask. If they say no, so what? Move on. If you don't have the nerve to ask, you'll never get, And so that's something he taught me at a young age, and so that never bugged me.
So you had no fears, you just went.
Well, you ask it, you get rejected. Okay, fine, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. It's not going to be handed to you. On the other hand, there were frustrating times. Like I remember once, you talk about networking and contacts and whatnot. After after leaving AT&T, and maybe we'll circle back into my reasons for leaving AT&T. Then I went to work for Touche Ross, what was then a Big 8 accounting firm and consulting firm. Now it's since been merged into Deloitte, so technical name of the firm now is Deloitte and Touche.
And you were there during that transition, so you saw the.
No, I was there before the acquisition or merger with Deloitte. I was there back in the late 80s, from 85 to 87. The merger with Deloitte happened some years later, so this while Touche was still independent. But, you know, it wasn't working out. It wasn't working out at Touche, and senior partner in my office called me and said, "Mark, this is not working out. You got to look for another job." I said, "Okay, fine. You know,
You didn't try to
no, it's tough. I said, "What are you saying, Charles?" He said, "Mark, you're fine."
Oh, okay.
Okay, fine.
No
But Touche was very good. Well, first of all, it's not unexpected because I went in there sort of a reaction to AT&T. AT&T, when I started, 1 million employees, highly bureaucratic, lots of levels of management. And one of the key things that irked me as an aggressive young guy is that seniority and experience counted for a lot. And I saw myself as a very high performer related to my peers and my managers. And my managers recognized that, even related to people who were levels above me, but it came down to, "Mark, you're too young, you can't get promoted." So, I'm wasting my time here, I'm out of here. Touche Ross seemed appealing at the time. You know, things seem appealing before you know what it's all about. They had an up-or-out policy, which was essentially each year you'll be evaluated on how well you're progressing to being a partner.
And that seemed very refreshing.
Well, say, gee, you know, so like they're not going to have me stuck in a dead-end job for like 30 years and say, "Yeah, maybe next year, maybe next year." No, the whole deal at Touche was up-or-out, what they called an up-or-out policy. And that at such times that the partners determined that you would not be partner material, they'll just tap you on the shoulder, and the circumlocution they used was, "You'll be counseled out."
Oh.
So head partner Charles Biggs called me and said, "Mark, or third, I said, "Charles, what do you say?" "You're fired." "Okay, thanks, Charles." because you're really not enjoying it here. "No, Charles, I'm not." "Well, there you go." But what was good about Touche was, even though it was, and Touche was very aggressive for like this. I remember one young hire they had. This young woman was there one day, and the head partner, Charles Biggs, said, "She can't find her way to the bathroom. She's out of here." But they would not kick you out on the street. The deal would be, you keep a desk here, you keep a phone here, you keep the veneer that you're still employed here for as long as you need. You know, we will give you a specific amount of severance, but you can pretend you're still an employee of Touche for as long as it took to get a new job.
That's very civilized, isn't it?
And it's also very helpful because this was the environment. So as soon as I step out of the head partner's office, everyone's BC's, "Okay, heard Mark here. Here are all the headhunters I know here. These firms are," it's like I had a stack yay high of headhunters to contact and companies to contact. So, you know, it wasn't that. And it took me several months to find some, but you know, I'm sort of taking the long and winding road here, but this is back to, was I ever fearful? Well, sometimes you have to be prepared for disappointment from unexpected places. So one of the people I contact after getting the boot from Touche is a fellow I knew who was a fellow Wharton alum, fellow Harvard alum, got very friendly with him through the Harvard Alumni Club in New Jersey, and he had actually really liked my enthusiasm for the club, and he was instrumental in getting me elected to the board of the club. I was still in my early 20s, and by far I was the youngest person ever elected to the board. And this guy had a fairly high position of Prudential Insurance in Newark. He was a money manager for them. I said, "Okay, you know, I'm just saying, contact this guy, see what he has there." I was absolutely amazed at his attitude. Remember, this is a guy, Harvard and Wharton graduate, he's thinking in terms of education, in terms of people being flexible, people being able to adapt to new jobs, and I was all of 28 years old at the time. He essentially said, "Mark, you're washed up. You're 28, you know, there's no new, you know, you're essentially slaughtered. What are you doing at Touche? That's all you're good for the rest." I was,
You expected to get some mentoring.
I know, instead, I said, no, well, how do you break into money management there, Paul? Oh, you gotta do it from the beginning. I said, what, from the time I'm born, I'm handed a rattle that has something to do with money management? What are you talking about? So I don't know. I never figured out what was the issue with this guy, whether it was he really didn't have the hiring authority that he pretended to, and this was just a way to swat me aside, or he's just not interested for whatever crazy reason, trying to bring me on. So I was sort of like, okay, fine, and it wound up probably being the right choice, because we talk about culture. I was mentioning the AT&T culture, part of the AT&T culture that didn't appeal to me, the fact that it was highly bureaucratic and seniority accounted for so much. It's something I was mentioning to Professor Manlow beforehand. In retrospect, I should have been able to anticipate that, because look at the basic aspects of AT&T in that age. 1 million people, so it has to be highly organized, highly unionized, highly regulated. So having a very rigid structure like that, in which seniority counts so much as it does in most unions, probably should not have surprised me. But in retrospect, I say, gee, I should have been able to anticipate that. But I found this situation didn't appeal to me, so I moved on. When I went to Touche Ross, the upper-out policy seemed to appeal to me, but then I saw actually the way it worked, that Touche Ross was a highly political, sort of, to some extent, cutthroat environment, and the fact that the amount of hours one had to work to get ahead, 80 hours a week was, you're barely punching the clock. So I was just, as a young guy in his 20s, I was just ground down in my first year there. So it's clear I had to make a change. But with this opportunity at Prudential, very quickly after I got over the disappointment of being rebuffed and being told this stuff, you're washed up at 28, I said, is this really a culture I want to work in? And the reason I say that, I think this is also something I may have written about in the book, and I don't know if it's in these selections that Professor Manlow gave you, but I believe in the book I have a section which I call stacked cafeterias. When I went to meet this acquaintance from the Harvard and Wharton clubs in Prudential's headquarters in Newark, we took an elevator up to go to the executive dining room where he ate. And what I found is the elevator went and had a window in it. In that side of the building there was like 7, 8, or 9 even stacked cafeterias. It went from one for the lowest level employees, which essentially was a windowless bunker in the basement, kind of dingy. It makes this place look like the Taj Mahal. All the way up to this bright, and I said, gee, culturally, this sort of hierarchy, that was my thing, because I was used to it. AT&T and Western, one common cafeteria for everybody, no matter what your level, executives and whatnot.
Just the message
I know, and going up and being able to see, and some, that just rubbed me the wrong way in Touche. Everyone's always on the road anyway, but they had one small cafeteria at their headquarters at 1633 Broadway, just north of Times. It was just one basic lunchroom. That's where the partners ate, and that's where all the worker bees ate. But this thing at Prudential, I don't know if I'd like that. At first at Merrill Lynch, it was common cafeteria, and you had senior execs like Lonnie Steffens, the fellow who headed up the retail brokerage side of Merrill, who I referenced regarding Jeff Bennett, the smart CFO. Steffens used to just parade in and just plop down by a random employee and say, what's on your mind? What do you think? And that's more the type of culture that appeals to me. So, in retrospect, being shown the door at Prudential was probably good, because the sort of insight into culture I got from that experience with the cafeterias probably would not have been a good fit for me.
That was at where?
This is Prudential Insurance in Newark.
What about, I think everyone in class is either a junior or a senior here, but maybe there are, in the other class there are a few sophomores. What were, reflecting back to when you were college, and you are interviewing, right, for Harvard?
Well, I did for a number of years, and I gave, we could talk about the reasons why, but I gave that up a number of years back, but I was one of the more active interviewers. I would interview anywhere from 5 to 10 students a year.
Well, I wonder what you would advise a student right now who's a sophomore, who's a junior, who's a senior, who's thinking of a career, let's say in general in business, it might be marketing, it might be finance, what would be the advice that you would?
You know, the basic thing, it's just reiterates stuff I've said so far, that unfortunately taking a specific course, getting a specific certification, unfortunately is no guarantee of employment in that field. The basic skills, so much as you could hone them at the collegiate level, you could do remedial work on your writing and your basic mathematical skills. You know, really, as long as you have algebra down pat, you're in great shape.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because after high school, we were told, you'll never need this again.
Nonsense. Nonsense,
And I
nonsense.
said, thank God.
If you're in any sort of quantitative, as I said earlier, because I was always thinking in terms of models and whatnot, I like the stuff I did at Merrill Lynch, profitability modeling and whatnot. All it really came down to was algebra. I did not have to use any advanced
And that
statistical
scared a
methods.
lot of people when you say all it comes down to is
I did not
algebra.
have
For many people.
I did not have to know anything than the most basic accounting, and gee, how many accounting courses did I take in my life? Very few. There's one course I took as an undergrad, the one accounting course offered to undergrads at Harvard. At Wharton, it was just that management accounting course from which I gave Zorro his ticket to being CFO of this joint venture in Spain where he could have 3-hour siestas and play tennis. This is absolutely true. This is why he wanted that. You know, this is why he wanted, and of course he was a native speaker of Spanish, being a Cuban refugee. So that also put him near the top of the list. He was, but he was also a very glib guy in English. You know, this guy was glib in any language you learn. But just those basic skills and be able to talk in front of people, these are really the essential skills. And then in terms of just getting basic competency in the key areas that interest you the most.